Hello, everyone, and welcome to Real Property Pros and Cons, episode 12. I think we're almost going to be in the teens, which is really, really exciting. That means that I have found 12 people who want to talk about real estate related stuff for an hour on this show, which is great. So, before we get started, again, I was reading the news because honestly, that's one of the things that I do with my time. But instead of reading all of the, really whatever news that usually shows up, I read about real estate and or just like data or really weird nerdy stuff. And I saw this interesting article in Venture Beach, and it was a report, and it said data engineers spend 2 days per week firefighting bad data quality, which first of all I thought was really kind of interesting. Like, isn't that what a data engineer is supposed to do? And second of all, apparently they said on average, respondents in this survey, which was conducted by Wakefield Research, said that 40% of their time is spent evaluating or checking data quality. I guess that means that the data coming in is bad quality. So that means that somebody has to look at it and figure out whether or not it is or is not good or bad quality. And then afterwards, fix it. And poor data quality apparently affects the bottom line of companies, which actually kind of makes sense. 40% of respondents said that bad data affected 25% or more of their company revenue. What does this mean and how does this relate to real estate? Well, I didn't actually know. But then I remembered one of my friends, or, friend, somebody that I know, somebody that I was able to rope into coming onto the show, let's just put it that way, is a data engineer and also works in the real estate industry. And I was like, hey, you know what this person could do? This person could talk to us about data quality and data and why we should care about it in the real estate industry. And so, for that reason, I brought in our guest today, and we're going to spend about an hour talking about real estate data and, where it is, why you should care about it, all that sort of fun, interesting stuff. So, when we come back, we will have our guest with us, and he will talk to us all about data. And I realize that maybe some of you are going to be like, data, I don't really want to tune in. But he's also really fun to talk to, and he has some really interesting jokes and can make data sound really interesting. So don't go away, and we will be right back. Hello. All right. Well, we have our guest here today, Michael Markalski. Mike Markalski. Mike has worked in the real estate and data technology industry for the last 10 years at a boutique custom website company, which grew into a data warehouse and was eventually acquired by a leading company in real estate and property data. He currently works to support a data provisioning API and improve services as MLS data moves into the modern era. He also teaches vendors and brokerages about how to navigate the world of MLS data. This actually all sounds really interesting to somebody like me who, works in the real estate industry. So, thank you, Mike, for being with us. I really, really appreciate your being here. And so, I guess the first question that I have for you is what exactly is data and why should we care about it?
Yeah. So first, thanks for having me on your show. I normally talk about this stuff fairly regularly all throughout the day, and it's actually nice to be able to just sit down and give information and not have to worry about any sort of, oh, well, your services need to improve in this manner or that manner. Like, well, okay, but let's make sure you understand everything first. And that I think is really one of the big things that we have as a problem when we do go into having any sort of discussion regarding, well, what is the data for? Um, the primary source that you do get it from is going to be at the MLS, which is the multiple listing service, or in the case of New York City, it would be REBNY, the Real Estate Board of New York. They are not an MLS. They are very clear about that. And that's the main source for anytime you list a property. That's where it goes before it goes to Zillow. um, and that's not where it stops, though. That is normally what I work with, but from there you end up with public record data. You have foreclosure data that comes from sometimes public record, and then the various banks and everyone who might be interested in doing those foreclosures. There's offenders for neighborhood general, how safe does a neighborhood sort of, you know, applications, that sort of a thing. Um, I think that the most important thing regarding this is just legitimately the consumer. It's supposed to support them in their ability to find a house that they want to live in and a neighborhood that they want to live in. To a lesser extent, it's also about the investors. I know lately there's been a lot of talk about how much investors are taking up large portions of the market, but we're still in an area where it's predominantly private individuals buying their own first homes. So despite the fact that it feels like there's a whole lot more of investment buy up, we're still pretty far away from them being the majority. But that is something that we might want to be concerned about in the future. But for right now, we do have the support for the private buyer. And the main way we do that and guarantee that they get what they want is going to be with the data that we can get out of the MLS and from everywhere else.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. So, I guess what kind of data do you collect? You said like crime data. You said MLS data. I know what the MLS is. I know what I want to find on the MLS, but like, what kind of data comes from the MLS most of the time?
Yeah. So what you normally see in an MLS is there's always the basic information, price, square footage, beds, baths. That's all kind of the the expected amount that you see when you just do a quick search on whatever website. If you're on, Redfin, Zillow, or whatever, um, then you see those results. And from there you can kind of dig in a little bit more and see things regarding, is there an HOA, pools, what's the garage like, all of that sort of stuff. That's the stuff that really does matter to the buyer, and we do try to do our best to make sure that it is readable, legible, and for our part, we do try to make it fun to read and make it feel like there is a human behind it. Because I know if you look on like Realtor.com, it's just a straight printout of HOA colon no, and while that works, it's not very welcoming. It's a very industrial kind of approach to it, which I can't blame them for. They're a big provider, and they are funded directly by the NAR. That's the sort of a thing you would kind of expect out of a larger company like that. But when you get some of these more boutique companies, like what we support and who we initially were, then you try to give it that human touch, because that's how we get ahead in the industry.
I think that's a actually really interesting point. That it sounds like there's the data piece, which is kind of just the information that can be used for some purpose, and then there's how the consumer actually sees that data. And so you, as a company, collect the data and then try to provide it to a consumer, either a brokerage or a home buyer or whatever, in a way that they can understand. So it's not just like, dots and dashes and yeses and nos on a list.
Yeah, that would be the primary focus of what we end up. Yeah, that's like our core. Our I would say that's our core competency. There's other things that we do that are not just providing the data to the end consumer, and that would be things like we prepare the data, and sometimes we have our own models that we that we use, or we just prepare the data necessary for other people's models for various other data aggregators, or if it's for valuations, um, home searches that are not ones that we directly support, because there's a lot of those. And then just marketing tools. There's a lot of marketing companies out there that would benefit from having a direct connection to the MLS, or the foreclosure information or public records, and most of them don't have that. And in the case of MLS data, because obviously public record, you can go get that. It might take a long time to obtain, and it might be very out of date depending on the county, but you can always get that. MLS data is one of those sorts of things where you have to jump through a lot of hoops for licensing, you have to pay potentially quite a lot of money for it, and you have to run your use case past the MLS and see if you're even allowed to have the data. And even if you are allowed to have the data, are you allowed to do it for any reason other than, say, a search on a website? Do they actually let you do an AVM with that data? Do they let you do any sort of back end work with it, where you're doing like market trends, statistics, that sort of a thing? And there's a pretty gray area there where what MLSs specifically allow and what you want to do don't actually align. And for our part, we're always trying to be the good guy in the industry. We always err on the side of, if the MLS doesn't want us to do it, we won't do it. Um, but that doesn't mean that the actual consumers, either the people who are actually buying the homes, or the enterprise customers who are more geared towards providing those additional tools, um, that doesn't mean that they're getting what they want out of it. So there's a lot of tight wire walking to try to get people what they need while staying within the bounds of our contracts.
Yeah. And you used a number of words in there, some of which I caught and some of which I didn't. You mentioned AVM and you also mentioned enterprise customers, which were the two big ones that stood out. So, AVM is what exactly?
Let's see. Automated valuation model, I think, is the actual phrase. I might have filled some of that in, but that's essentially what it means. It's when you can go to a website, you type in like the address of your own home, and it comes back to you with, here is what your home is worth, here is what it was worth however long ago. Feel free to edit the beds and baths and see how that changes your values, like that sort of a thing. um, that's what those are, and they are very quick tools just to get an idea of what does the I don't want to say the market, because the models don't always actually follow what market forces would say, and in fact they probably mostly don't. But they do attempt to do so, because they do take into account various comps from your neighborhood that you're in, and then just various um, trends that have occurred recently. So they do try to take into account the current market state, but they're not always up there. The one of the most famous ones is going to be the Zestimate from Zillow, but they're by no means the only one, and the values can vary actually quite widely between all of the models. And one of those things I do have to say when people do look at AVMs is, just because an AVM gives you a certain value does not mean your home is worth that much, either upwards or downwards. And I think the
Ye-
second one was enterprise customers, but
yes. Also, I popped up on the screen that comps are comparable properties to the property. So, um, I will let you answer the enterprise customers question, but I definitely kind of want to talk a little bit more about these automated valuation models, AVMs, to talk a little bit more about that.
yeah, well, we definitely can. I have to say on that one, I'm a little limited in my own knowledge. It goes a little bit outside of what we do from my team, because we're not statisticians. Basically, we're not data scientists. We're data engineers. There's a big difference. Um, but enterprise customers, those would be when basically anybody who is a large value customer to us, who wants to be nationwide, is usually what we're looking at. And it could be anything. It could be that they are a appraisal company. It could be that they are a brokerage. It could be that they're just in marketing and they just want to have a more nationwide presence. That's who we define as enterprise customers. They're
Hmm.
not the only ones that we service. Like we do have individual agent websites. We do have small brokerage websites, or in some cases very large brokerages, but they're only in one area. They're just in like Washington D.C. or something like that.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, that makes sense. So I am curious. You said there's a difference between a data analyst and a data engineer. What is the difference?
so usually a data scientist, they don't have anything to do with actually obtaining the data. They might in some companies, but largely they are looking at the data as presented to them, and then they are building models off of that. And those are both things that we don't actually do on the engineering side. Our goal is to obtain the data and push it through an ETL pipeline. So when we pull out the data, we transform it, then we load it somewhere else. Um, and it sounds really simple in theory because you think, okay, somebody has a database, you have a database, so you just say, give me the things in your database and we'll put it into our database. Once you start getting into those technical issues, though, it turns out that there's no standardization of any kind, no matter how much the industry tries. Like right now, we have the latest one. It's Rezo, always producing real estate standards. It's the Real Estate Standards Organization. They do great work, and they are always pushing a very common data dictionary and set of standards for everything to follow. And for the most part, it feels like the data companies that are basically middlemen who are offering their data services to MLSs to store it and then ship it somewhere, um, they half-heartedly want to follow it, sometimes wholeheartedly, but they don't quite get there because they have legacy software to support. So you always end up with this situation where you have data that is quote unquote standardized, and we then have to go into it and say, okay, well, how do we actually standardize this? Because even if we don't standardize the values for property types, because property types, those can be very hyper local. Some areas, if you call something a single family residence, that is what the standard home is called. In other places it's called detached, and other places they just don't even have a word for that, and they just have the separate types of potential single family homes. um, and those all make sense in those locales. Unfortunately, they do not make sense to national customers, to enterprise customers who want nationwide data but also want everything standardized, or even to people who are just looking in other parts of the country. If you're looking at moving to Hawaii and you haven't really done good enough research, do you know what a lanai is? Most of them don't. Do you know what fee simple actually means? Almost nobody does. You have to go to your agent to start to talk through those things, or you have to do the research yourself. And a lot of people don't even know that that's the sort of thing that they need to consider. Um, and it has to be provided, and sometimes it's just not provided in most areas of the country. And there's just these little pockets of, well, here's a special bit of data for this area, and it does matter. It really does matter for them, because I don't want anyone to think that, okay, well, they think they're special but they're not. No, they actually are, and that it's a critical part of their local industry and of their culture, and it's something that people need to be aware of.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. So I'm not going then if it's outside of your area of expertise, I'm not going to actually ask you about sort of these automated valuation models, other than to ask like other than to not ask, highlight what you said that yeah, sometimes they're great and other times they're not so great. And I think what you can talk about or agree to is that the quality of those AVMs is based on the quality of data that is used to make the model, right?
That is part of it, but it's not the whole thing. So I'd say the first thing you have to consider is, yes, is the data even good enough to actually produce reliable values? And if you look at some place like non-disclosure states like Texas, a lot of those MLSs, they can disclose the sale prices because they are not government entities. So being a non-disclosure state doesn't actually apply to them, but they respect the reasons why the state is non-disclosure, so they often don't provide that information. Certainly not through public record. So most of those valuation tools are through public record. Like I know ours is entirely public record, even though we do have MLS data because it's just easier that way. If it's if we don't want to have a MLS data licensed AVM and jump through all the hoops for that, then we just don't, and we use public records like everybody else does. And it works for most places, but then you run into places like especially Western Texas, where not only is it non-disclosure, but and you rarely ever get prices, but there's also not that many people that live there, so it's very hard to actually come up with real comps for that area. Because if you come up with a comp for a house for a town that's like 30 miles away or 50 miles away, is that really a comparable property? Because again, it is 50 miles away. Is that town significantly different in some way? So it can be a little bit tough there. But that isn't the only thing, because there's also the model itself. And I'm not sure that anybody has, the perfect model. Maybe it is out there, but nobody knows that it is because everyone wants to think that their model is the best one. Is ours? I don't know. I think actually we have three different ones, and I don't know if we've actually whittled those down to like one primary one we want to focus on. But we have a lot that is possible for us to do, and there's a lot that you can look at, and there's lots of different things that you can focus on or choose not to focus on. um, I guess one of the best examples that I could have was we get a calls in from not customers of ours, but basically from random people who ended up using an AVM every so often. And sometimes they will note that, well, my property, it says it's worth $2 million, but I know for a fact that it should be worth 2.8 because that's what I paid for it. And they do have a point in that, yes, they paid for $2.8 million, so technically that is what the house can sell for because clearly it did. But if the valuations are consistently coming back at 2.2 or 2.3 or 2.4, that can be that can feel really bad, like, oh god, did I get ripped off, so they do want to have that peace of mind that no, it's not that they got ripped off, it's that the model just doesn't include certain things that were very important to you. Like, you have a 6-car garage, did the model actually include a garage beyond yes or no? Or a pool, did it note the pool at all? Does the pool actually increase value or does it decrease value?
That
Those are sorts of things that you have to consider because especially now with how much water can cost and how hot it is, like how much does a pool actually add to the property to the value of your property? It's really hard to say, and I would much rather leave it up to data scientists, and people who are very good at that sort of thing, like agents who do those a lot. They generally develop those skills to get a lot more on the mark than an automated system ever could, because they can actually think about those things and they can change from like one model that they normally use to another one because this house is significantly different, because this house has this is a property that stands out in that neighborhood because it's the largest one, and the garage is twice as big, and it has all of these other things that people want but don't generally go into the value. So an agent can do that and a valuation tool can't. So you always have to accept that an AVM, it's a ballpark.
Yeah, and actually, a lot of AVMs actually come out with a range as opposed to a specific number.
Which is
Um,
the more important the more important set of numbers to pay attention to is the range itself, because the middle number, I don't know if it's usually the median or the average, not, or those are the same thing. I don't know if it's usually like just the average of the two, or not, but I assume that it is, um, and because I don't know what else it would be. um, and that's the one they kind of want to base everything off of, and then they just ignore the fact that, well, yeah, but we said that it could be as much as 200,000 more, which gets a lot closer to what you paid, and then you should consider the fact that this house was very valuable to you because it had these things that mattered to you.
Right. And I mean, I think when you think about valuation, which is not exactly what I thought we were going to talk about, but I'll just make this point before we move on. You know, houses are worth what somebody is willing to pay for them. And, unlike, I mean, just like any other thing, but, because houses are worth so much money, typically, a couple $100,000, a couple $1 million, whatever, people there's fewer people who are just willing to cough up that amount of money, and so there's a little bit more wiggle room in terms of what the house is worth. But a specific buyer, for example, if you look at like Boise, Idaho, where property values have increased a lot, it's because you had a lot of people from states that were not Idaho, from places that were not Boise, who were looking at a house and saying, hey, where I'm from, this house would be worth, you know, 3 times as much as what I'm paying here, so I'm willing to pay $100,000 more than the list price. But that has more to do with the actual people who were there and how their sort of internal valuation of the property is versus the actual value in the specific area. So that's super helpful to think about. Um, so you talk about data and kind of trying to standardize it, and you also talked about sort of like having specific properties and different types of features to properties. And I wonder how, I mean, do you standardize the data? Is it standardizable? Or are things just going to remain region specific?
Uh, so it is definitely standardizable, but you have to think about the fact that maybe you actually shouldn't do that. I know in some cases you think, okay, I want to build an easy application. This is usually the developers thinking, I want to build an easy application that every single time somebody loads up, no matter where they're looking for, you see the exact same options everywhere. And honestly, I think that's a little unrealistic. I think that there is value in the local terminology, and sometimes you can get away without making use of it. You know, if it's the difference between single family residential and detached, they're all the same thing. So if you do want to just call everything single family, then okay, go for it. But then you end up running into the more specific sorts of things where you have to wonder, like, is a dual home the same thing as a duplex? And at the end of the day, if you're in a position where somebody doesn't know what they're looking for, even though they should, like they know they're looking for a certain type of property or a certain sort of trait for a property, and you chose to call it something that they don't know what that term means, then you're potentially, losing them because they won't know what that is. If it's something completely foreign to them, then they have to go, Wikipedia it or Google it or something, or DuckDuckGo or whatever it is they're going to use. And is that really the best thing to do? I don't really think so. I mean, generally, conventional wisdom is that once that you get them on your website, you don't want them to leave until they've contacted you. And then it doesn't matter what they do from there. It's just the fact that they've contacted you is the point of your website, or the point of the tool that you have generated is in some way to draw people in and not make them just leave and never see you again. So you probably don't want to send them anywhere else. But at the same time, that is harder to support if you're just, regional, because how do you ensure that you are properly switching between each of the various regions? You can sort of do that by the MLS itself, because they're not tied to geographic boundaries at all, but they have a core area usually that makes them look like they are tied to a geographical boundary, and they're usually exclusive to that area. But then you look at like the San Francisco Bay Area, where technically there is sort of kind of one MLS there. It's NorCal MLS. They're on the agent side, they're kind of one, but on the data, like engineering side, the stuff that I see, they're all completely separate. I don't know if they're going to actually merge and give us one feed at any point in time that is actually standardized between all of them. Hopefully they do. I know that they were planning on it. But that's a big process, especially with so many MLSs involved. That honestly, I would be surprised if anything happens just from the sheer amount of logistics that go into it. And honestly, all respect to everyone involved in trying to get that together. 7 MLSs combined, especially after Carrots collapsed. Um, that is a bold and ambitious move, and I really hope for the best for them. But until that time, there are 7 different feeds up there, 7 different MLSs up there, and some of them are functionally identical to a couple of the others, and some of them aren't. And you know, do they all have the same information as each other? No, they don't.
I'm I'm kind of curious what you are referring to when you say carrots collapsed.
Oh, Carrots was the California attempt at like a statewide MLS, so quote unquote statewide, because it probably was never going to be the entire state, because there's always MLSs out there who they're proud to be on their own and they want to do their own thing. But Carrots did a good job for a while, and at some point, it just happened that, well, nobody really needs Carrots anymore because CRMLS is doing a great job on their own, and they left Carrots, and then everyone else kind of realized, well, if CRMLS can do it on their own, then maybe we can too, and kind of everyone else seemed like they actually got out. I don't actually know that this is exactly how it happened from the perspective of how internally the MLSs were thinking, but I'd like to imagine that it was all very positive. Um,
Right, exactly. Let's assume the best of the MLSs and make sure that and assume that they just wanted to do good things and serve their customers as well as good as well as they possibly could.
Yeah, well, I legitimately think that they do want to do that. It's, do they have the ability to do that? Who knows? It varies. It depends on who ends up working there and the circumstances of the market, and what the customers, or not customers in that case, it would be agents and brokerages, and what they're demanding. They have a lot of stuff that pulls them in every direction. But ultimately, I would like to think the best, that it was all amiable, or amicable, and eventually CRMLS, they're on their way to becoming basically California statewide. Between them and NorCal, I don't really expect basically any other California MLSs to exist fairly soon. Like, I guess Fresno might stay alone because they are very proud of what they've put together, and they should be. But barring them, uh, yeah, I feel like we're going to be down to just a few MLSs in the coming years.
Yeah. So we talk about the multiple listing service, which I guess I can kind of talk a little bit about. So the multiple listing service is essentially a way for real estate brokers, agents, people who are selling real estate in many different capacities, not just houses, but commercial properties, rentals, all of that, so that they can put all of the information in one place so that agents and in some cases consumers can know what is available in one location. So that's kind of what MLSs do. And Mike, you're just talking about how they actually accomplish that. And it sounds like there's a whole bunch of back end data that they have that's not necessarily completely standardized. And so when you, as a data engineer, are trying to deal with that data, you basically have to either figure out a way to standardize it to all of these people, or you have to figure out what is important so that you can have multiple different feeds of data from the same location
More from various locations.
or from the
Yeah,
various
yeah.
locations.
Trying to try to jam together like Phoenix and Washington D.C., because there's brokerages that operate in both, and both of those have different cultures and different markets.
Right,
Um,
exactly.
and yeah, there's a lot that goes on in the background. Ultimately, for what we ended up doing, we decided localization is probably the better way to go. So while we standardize the field names, we try not to standardize values specifically, so that locals know what they are looking at. Um, does that help national buyers? Probably not so much. Does it help national investors? Probably not so much. But from the investor standpoint, I don't really think it should be a problem because most of what they look for is it's some pretty basic information. It's where is it located? They know the general areas they want. They know the general price points that they want, and it kind of comes down to just those two things. What can they do with that property? And so they don't need nearly as much information. Whereas private buyers, you and me, individuals, we want a little bit more, and we might actually want to know what everything is like for people who are in the area that we're going to live in. Have the right verbiage, know what we're talking about. I don't actually know if anybody else has that issue, but I would never want to move someplace and be talking about uh, properties and everything and have everyone look at me like I just do not know what I'm talking about because I just don't. I'm not using the right phrases and they've just never been to San Diego. And it turns out that we just would name things really weird. I don't know if that's true, but I would hate to find out.
I mean, I can imagine like an enclosed porch versus a lanai versus a sunroom. Those are
Versus a
kind of
Florida room.
versus yes, those are all different terms for basically the same structural component in a home.
Yeah. My favorite is always granny flat. It's like, okay, well, is it a granny flat or is it an in-law suite or is it just an ADU?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's another really classic one. Uh, and I don't know, finished basements are different, have different terms in different areas. Um, and you also talked about single family residences, but I think that in in California, or not really California, but like in San Diego, where we have um, a lot of tract housing, this is not as much of an issue. But in certain other places, like in the east, on the East Coast, where they don't have tract housing, whether it's a Victorian versus a Cape Cod versus a farmhouse, actually makes a big difference in both the desirability of the home and whether people want to live in it or not, or a ranch, for instance.
Yeah, and you end up with situations where you have like row houses. Um, they often have conjoined shared walls. They're often conjoined. Sometimes they aren't, and having a detached row house might actually be very important to you versus a attached row house because you don't want to share your walls with anybody because that's why you bought a house to begin with,
Right.
instead of living in an apartment. So those things can matter, and they can matter a lot to some people. So they might want to actually be able to search for that sort of thing instead of just, oh well, a detached row house is clearly a detached property, which we consider single family. So those are all the same thing. Like, well, they're not, but just like a row house is not a condo, so we don't want to put it in as a condo.
Right, exactly. Yeah, kind of traveling across the country, it is interesting to see and how different areas think about things, and also think about things as like have think about features of property. So for example, having a storm cellar is really important in the Midwest, a lot less important in California or San Diego, for instance.
And in fact, you probably don't want one in San Diego.
Yes, exactly. um, or having certain types of heating systems, or having an indoor pool. If you have a house in, Vermont, an indoor pool might be a really important thing to have. If you have a house in San Diego, an indoor pool seems kind of like, why do you even have that?
Yeah, it's just okay. Well, clearly you're rich, so.
Yes,
um,
exactly.
but I think one of my favorite examples is actually waterfront, where various types of waterfront mean various types of things, and obviously if you're on the ocean, the big thing is oceanfront. Um, but then, what counts as oceanfront, and what counts as just ocean view? How close do you actually have to be? That actually varies. For the longest time, I thought that oceanfront literally meant your backyard was on the beach, and like up in Carlsbad or Del Mar here, we have tons of houses like that. I'm sure all the beaches are probably like that, but those are the ones that I have more experience with. And they have their own little private sections of beach. During high tide, the beach is gone and they just have their backyards, which are now the closest beach, and they regularly get the surf going over the backyards and everything. And is that what you mean by oceanfront? In a lot of
Right.
cases, that's not. The next um block, across the street, and then on the other side, those could all technically count as oceanfront. And then anything that's on a cliff overhead that gets the tiniest bit of ocean view counts as ocean view and will cost more as a result. But well, what if the only time you actually get that ocean view is when that giant palm tree is in just enough wind that it leans enough for you to see your sliver of ocean?
Right, exactly.
But I mean, not just the ocean, but riverfront, or uh, I forget all of the sorts of values that are in I believe it's the Houston area. Um, it's Houston or San Antonio? I think it's San Antonio, where there's a lot of great looking rivers in Texas, where they just have these like giant like wrapping around snake uh, sort of looks to them from aerially, and those look like amazing rivers to be on. And I'd be like, okay, I would absolutely buy a riverfront property if there is water in that river. And in Texas, there often is, or at least was last I checked. But if it's in Southern California, oh well, we're riverfront. Like, what rivers are in San Diego? Well, the San Diego River, duh. Okay, how much water does the San Diego River actually have in it right now?
Right.
It has effectively none, um, and it's just kind of soggy marshland. So it's really more of a swamp front. And do you actually want swamp front?
Right, exactly. Mosquitoes and Zika and whatever other mosquito-borne illnesses will
Yeah.
migrate into the human population in the
Although
future.
I personally don't think I would mind, because I think swamps look great. And for the longest time, I've lived here in San Diego for a really long time, and I didn't think we had mosquitoes because I just had never been bitten by one. And I still haven't. My wife, on the other hand, she's like a lightning rod for them.
Yes.
So that
Well,
explains why I'm not getting bitten now, because they go for her instead.
I guess that is one benefit of having a mosquito shield.
Yes.
Um,
Still, though, I think that kind of security is probably not best, especially if you are actually worried about potential disease from mosquitoes, because they aren't great for that. Then sure, I get you probably don't want swamp front. That's true.
exactly. Yeah. Um, so we kind of talked a lot about different houses and how different people in different regions talk about houses. One of the questions that I had though also relates to, you're talking about public record data. So I think in general, a lot of viewers might be interested in knowing what data is public record, and A, how easy is it to find, and B, as I kind of just said, what is it? Like, what is public record?
Yeah. So the gist of public record is that your county comes out, grabs information about a property. They track the what was the last sale price. Again, unless it's well, I think if it's a non-disclosure, they still track it. They just don't disclose it. But they grab that information, and when you put in for like a permit to put on um, like an addition, they check that. Somebody comes out, measures it. They get the square footage down, probably. And that's one of those things where, okay, there's a lot of probablys in here. They probably have updated beds and baths. They probably have updated square footage. Um, and that's, I guess that's probably one of the main sticking points for people who do want to look at public record data. Is there's a lot of unsurety about what is actually in there and how accurate it is. And our best answer for most of them is, what we have is what you get, because that's what we have. And the reason that's what we have is because that's what the county has so far given us. Some counties will actually update very regularly. Some will do once a quarter. Some will do once every 6 months. Some will do once a year. It it's really hard to know exactly what the information you're looking at, how up to date that is. Um, but as far as accessing it, I mean, it's called public record. You can access it very easily. Um, you can. I don't think that most counties probably have websites that you can go to, but the bigger ones do, um, and you can find information like that from uh, portals that they have. And the way that we collect it, though, we actually send um, actual people to the locations where they can actually obtain it in bulk. And I don't know how they do this. I don't know how we manage it on our side. Um, and it sounds so crazy to me, especially when we used to do this before um, very quick internet access. But we have people who will literally go to like the county assessor or whoever wherever they are, and they get their like 5 minutes on a computer, get all the stuff that they want, and then they go back to the end of like a 30-person line because there's 30 other people trying to do the exact same thing that they are. And that just sounds crazy to me. I don't understand how that could possibly be a way for us to actually aggregate data, but apparently it's the best way to get public records. I don't I don't understand it personally. It seems just so very hard and complicated to do it that way, but if that's what you get, that's what you get.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
but the data that's actually in there, like I said, it varies. I don't do too much with public record myself. But the most that I usually see from it is basically answering the questions of, hey, when I looked up this valuation tool, it said that my house only had 2 bedrooms. I know for a fact that we put on this addition that added 2 additional bedrooms, so this should be 4 bedrooms. And my first thought to them is, were they permitted?
Right.
Like, do you know for a fact that those are actually that they are permitted? Because that could be a reason why they're not in there, and the other reason could just be that it hasn't been updated yet. Maybe they're expecting you to send in the information. Maybe they're expecting the contractor to send in the information. Maybe there's an appraiser who's supposed to come by and send it in. I don't know. Maybe the county has the information and they just haven't pushed their once every 3-year update that they decided to do because they
Right.
don't really care. They have
Yeah.
better things to do. Um, and they have a lot of leeway. If they have better things to do, they have better things to do. County supervisors can be very busy people.
It's true.
Um, and
Managing counties.
yeah, especially if it's a big one. Although I guess if it's big, they probably have a sufficient staff. I guess the
That
main
is-
problems would be the really small ones, population-wise, where the same thing with an MLS. If your county supervisors and stuff and your MLSs are like 2 people, that there's a lot of work for those 2 people. No matter how small the population is, there's a lot of work for those 2 people. Some things just don't matter anymore because they just don't have the staff.
yeah,
Uh,
that is true. Well, we got a couple of viewer questions on data, which is somewhat surprising. Actually, no, it's probably not surprising. We
Oh,
got a
there's
couple.
always questions, but I find most people just have their eyes glaze over when I start talking about data. So,
No, I mean it is actually an interesting topic, and it is, yeah, it's a worthwhile topic to think about. So I will uh, move on to our next segment, and we will ask the pro. Okay, so the first question is: do you think there is increasing need for data in the real estate industry moving forward?
oh, absolutely. I don't particularly see much happening with home sales um, without having a very vast knowledge of what you're looking for. Like there is a reason Zillow got to where it is. There's a reason Redfin got to where it is. There's a reason why Realtor.com is not falling behind those two really at all, despite the fact that its main concern is not making money and growing. And that's because they have all of that information, or almost all of that information. Um, and they do very well with it. I don't particularly see us getting to a point where that doesn't matter anymore. And really, I mean, I think basically every industry is really moving that way. Is what data do you need in order to survive as a company? And sometimes it's very surprising what you actually do end up needing once you really dive into it. I know we have some of our customers, they come to us thinking, well, we just want active properties and that's it, and we're pretty sure that that's all we'll ever need, and that's what we signed them on for. And then they come back to us in 3 months saying, hey, you know how we actually only needed active properties? So it turns out that it would be a lot easier if we also had sold properties. And to be honest, with our market trends, we also really want to know when properties don't actually sell, and it's easiest if we can get like, a vow feed or a full feed, something that has all of those withdrawn and expired listings as well. And then we have to come back to them with, okay, but we licensed you for actives. So if you want all of those other things, then we have to get back to the MLS. We have to go back to the data source. We have to ask them if this is allowed. And, then we get them set up and they'll come back again, 6 months later, say, hey, so about all that stuff, do you have geographical data? Because we would really like boundaries, boundary data. That would really help us a lot. And we're like, hey, it turns out we're a one-stop shop. So yes, we actually do have that for you. I'm surprised you didn't buy it to begin with.
Right. Well, I mean, so it really sounds like data is important. And I guess outside of the real estate industry, do you think that real estate data might be useful to, non-real estate related industries as well, or specifically MLS data might be useful to non-directly real estate related industries?
Um, it's that's kind of a yes or a yes and a no, because I think ultimately anybody who would use it actually is fairly well tied into the real estate industry, because at the end of the day, at some point there will be some sort of like industry touch point in their process. So they're going to be working with a brokerage, they're going to be working with an investing group, they're going to be working with uh, somebody who does marketing for real estate or something like that. So I really, somebody is dealing with real estate in most of the transactions that are probably happening, and that's why they want it. I think the thing that you really have to consider though is that the real estate industry is way bigger than most people actually think it is. So when most people think about the industry, it's just, oh well, it's realtors, it's people who are wear nice jackets and do open houses and sell and sell houses to people. And then I don't really understand how they make money off of that though. That's a lot of the feeling that a lot of people get. I mean, obviously agents know how they make money, but um, outsiders don't. But there's all of the technology that backs that up. We have multi-billion-dollar companies that are part of this. And we have uh, data aggregators, and we have data providers, and we have various computing systems that they use those systems for other things. CoreLogic doesn't just do real estate. They do other things. And if they didn't have their real estate business, I don't know that they could do those other things anymore. And the same goes with ours. We have a lot of data that is not strictly speaking real estate related. And I find that it's real estate has like tendrils that reach out and kind of grab everything and pull everything to it. And all of this data that you can otherwise get, if it is, like sex offender data and obviously foreclosures, but various bits of neighborhood data and points of interest, even, where is the nearest Starbucks to this particular property, because I want to make sure on my morning commute that I'm moving to this city for, that I can stop at a drive-through Starbucks on the way. All of this stuff ends up being pulled down into real estate. And honestly, I think real estate is probably one of the more important sources of data and users of data that we have, that isn't just like, oh, okay, well, we're just doing advertising from metadata we get from Facebook. Um, but of course I would say that because I do like having a job.
Right. I can understand enjoying having a job, but I think you make some really valid points, which is that everybody needs to live somewhere, right? Humans take up space. They will take up space in the house, in a house. They will take up space on the street. They will take up space in a canyon, but they will always take up space in some capacity or another. So the data about the space that humans are taking up probably is going to be really valuable. And Also, real estate is just one of the more long-standing industries because land, as I said, humans take up space, so they got to take up space somewhere. Um,
Yeah, and it's never going to go away. There's lots of industries that could. Will the printing industry eventually go away? Or will the builders of printers, will those go away? Yeah, maybe they very well could. Fax machines almost have so far. There's
right,
still some there's still some people holding on to them, but they've mostly gone away. And um, well, cathode rays, we don't really use those in TVs anymore. Those most have gone away.
right,
Real estate, though, we're always going to have land, and we're always going to have people who want that land, and we're always going to have people who don't want that particular part of piece of land, but they do want that other land 3 miles away because that's nicer for some reason.
right,
And
exactly.
we're always going to have to support them. I don't really see it going away. The entire state of Florida might end up underwater, but the part that's not, that's going to be prime real estate.
Right. That is true. Sorry, Florida. Um, so the second question that also came up is: do you think that data will make agents unnecessary in transactions?
Honestly, I hope not. I think that there is a chance that the making the data readily available could start making people think that they actually can work without an agent, and that's dangerous. And that is one of the downfalls of the giant portal sites is they make people think that they have the same skill set that agents do because, oh well, hey, I know how to navigate this website, I can find all the information I need. It's like, you can't though. There's a lot of confidential information that your agent can, like, they're not going to actively say necessarily, so here's all of these terrible things about about this property that are confidential, but they could say, well, maybe you should consider that there are some certain things about this, like if you were to think about the fact that you're in a flood zone, uh, that might be important to you, and it could be that the data that is presented on a portal doesn't actually say that it is in a flood zone. Um, or I guess the favorite is always, did someone die in the house? Which you're going to need an agent to find that out. You're not. No one's going to display that on their websites. You're definitely going to need an agent for that. And yeah, I personally find agents to be extremely valuable. I think that they are the lifeblood of our industry. I know there's so many groups of people within our industry that you could say that about, but I think ultimately without agents being there to collect the data, to massage it, to make sure that it's accurate, to write those marketing remarks, they're always going to exist in some form or another. Will they make the same amount of money they potentially can now? I mean, maybe not. There's always like the flat fee groups and everything that don't really charge that much at all, or the sellers who they don't do almost any work at all, but they will take the $1,000 to just throw your listing on the MLS really fast, and they expect you to market it, and that might work for a lot of people. I don't think that is the future. Um, and if we start moving in that direction, just out of sheer force of will of people not wanting to work with agents, then I think we're all going to be worse off.
Yeah, and I think in the small amount of time that we have left, I think one of the things that I have noticed, and I mean, I guess it's also partially true of me, but people really have lived since 2008. When we look at the people who are sort of incoming new, people like you, people like me, we have basically always lived in a good real estate market, at least as professionals. It's been a good real estate market. It's been a seller's market. People have wanted to buy houses, people have wanted to sell houses, and overall, it's been good. Um, I think as the market shifts and maybe it's more of a buyer's market or maybe it's less of a seller's market or whatever, I think that some of the optimism about the real estate market and the idea that these people are not necessary is going to change when good agents, good representation does become necessary for people to function.
Yeah, I think at some point people are going to realize more and more because right now we're kind of in a downswing on people thinking that agents are worthwhile. There are people who don't even know that you yourself are not paying an agent to help you buy a house. I've even had that
So,
conversation with people.
so I do now need to say, according to the National Association of Realtors, that technically that is not true, and technically the cost of the agent is baked into the price, but people are
That
not
that's
technically.
true. That is technically true, but having that baked into the price is it's always going to be, like it's never not going to be. So you might as well have the agent because you're paying for them anyway. So get a
Yes.
buyer's agent, have them walk you through stuff, have them protect you, quite honestly.
Right. Absolutely. Well, on that note, we are definitely out of time. I want to thank you so much for being with us tonight, Mike. And also, I have to say, a lot of your discussion about data was really helpful and elucidating. And it is really also helpful to know what data is available and who might be kind of interested in it. So, I want to thank you for being here with us. And next week, I will be back with another awesome and amazing real estate pro.